we must remain vigilant against all attempts from the outside and from the inside to erode our national sovereignty. We will not ask permission, and we will not apologize for protecting the United States of America. We will not kneel.
Young America's Foundation is the premier outreach organization of the conservative movement. In 2018, the Los Angeles Times called YAF one of the most preeminent and influential forces in the nation's conservative youth movement. Each year, we introduce thousands of America's youth to the fundamental conservative values we all believe in, such as individual freedom, free enterprise, a strong national defense, and traditional American values, through campus activism initiatives, campus lecture tours, and conferences. I have the distinct honor of introducing tonight's speaker, who is a longtime friend of the Foundation. The Honorable John Bolton is currently serving as the 27th National Security Advisor of the United States, appointed by President Donald Trump in April of 2018. Bolton is a native of Baltimore, Maryland. He graduated from Yale University with his bachelor's in 1970 and graduated from Yale Law School in 1974. He has dedicated his life to public service, serving in key roles for the United States Department of Justice, Department of State, and United States Agency for International Development. In 2005, Bolton was appointed by President George W. Bush as the United States Ambassador to the United Nations. He also served as the Senior Vice President and Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, as well as a contributor to Fox News. Bolton recognizes the importance and fundamental need for a strong national defense and for America's role as a global power in promoting democracy around the world. He resides with his wife, Gretchen, and daughter, Jennifer, in Bethesda, Maryland. We are honored to have such an esteemed conservative speaker with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable John Bolton.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's great to be here tonight, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you. The conference agenda sounds fantastic, and I can tell you as a former YAF member myself, if back in the day when we were doing it, if we had had the opportunity like this to be in Washington, it really would have been quite something. So good luck for the rest of it. I'm sure it'll be great. I want to talk to you tonight about some of the foreign policy challenges that face the United States today, but I want to start off with a little Edmund Burke, who's somebody that I read as a high school student, and one of the things that propelled me toward conservatism. Burke, of course, had an extraordinary political career serving in the British Parliament during both the American and the French Revolutions. He understood that the foundational reality for foreign policy was the national interest. He despised idealistic fantasies with no pragmatic purpose. He believed that prudence in statecraft and reasoning from empirical reality helped inform what a foreign policy should be. I think that provides the foundation for how we ought to proceed across the board today. Now, if you go back to the end of the Cold War, 1991, 1992, people came away from that with very different views of the way the world should be going forward. There were some people who, under the rubric of the end of history, declared it was over. We were done. We had won. We built down our military, we reduced our capabilities, we undermined our structures of deterrence, and weakened American influence around the world. People called it the peace dividend. That's what the liberals were doing. Conservatives were more fragmented, and there were three schools, I think, at that time at the end of the Cold War. One was flat-out isolationist. Now, there have always been some isolationists among conservatives, but it was an argument that made a lot more sense in 1790 than it does today. The second group wanted to go into another worldwide Wilsonian crusade for democracy. They're still out there too. And then there was a third category that I would put myself in, looking to build an American foreign policy based upon national interest. The first impression, we don't seek hostility with anybody. We are a trading nation. We've been an oceanic nation from the beginning, and we'd like a peaceful world to engage in peaceful intercourse. There are a lot of people out there, however, who just don't agree with that, and we are confronting some of them. We confronted some on 9/11, and there are now others we're facing today. I am not proposing a world order. I'm proposing a world where America is safe. It means that American sovereignty is no longer offered submissively to nations that would control our ambition. Now, not all Americans understand or agree with that. In 2009, President Obama addressed the UN General Assembly saying, "In an era where our destiny is shared, power is no longer a zero-sum game." He went on, "No world order that elevates one nation or group of people above another will succeed. No balance of power among nations will hold." Now, what he was talking about a world order that elevated one nation above another, was us. That's what he was opposed to. After another speech given by President Obama on the 65th anniversary of D-Day, a reporter said, comparing Reagan's speech in 1984, the reporter said, "Reagan was all about America. Obama is, we are above that now." But the job of America's president is to ensure the security of the American people. We are not above that now, and never will be. In his day, Theodore Roosevelt understood this fully. When President Woodrow Wilson called for making the world safe for democracy, Roosevelt replied emphatically, "First, we are to make the world safe for ourselves." That remains our objective today. Now, let's consider some of the specific problems we face. With Iran, we withdrew last year from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, because it failed utterly in preventing the mullahs from developing nuclear weapons. Any nation that chants death to America or death to Israel will not be allowed to have nuclear weapons. We designated the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps a foreign terrorist organization. No other element of a foreign government has ever earned such a dubious distinction. What it means in practice is that we are watching very closely for any individual, company, or institution which chooses to do business with the IRGC, and anyone associated with the group will find it extremely difficult to get into the United States. Following U.S. withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal, President Trump reinstituted sanctions to prevent Iran from being able to reach its objective of deliverable nuclear weapons. These sanctions are crushing Iran's economy, devaluing its currency, and depleting its natural reserves. Iran has tried every trick to smuggle oil to other nations in exchange for cash. When that didn't work out, they turned to other industrial products, and we sanctioned those as well. Iran's behavior has only grown worse. Not only does the regime continue to pursue nuclear weapons, it has increased its support for terrorism, such as aiding the Houthis in Yemen, and it has also significantly ramped up its conventional military activity in Syria and Iraq. The IRGC's Quds Force has become more aggressive, not less. Moreover, Iran has chosen the very risky course of confronting the United States directly. They have shot down our aircraft and recklessly seized ships in international waters. They choose to test ballistic missiles and increase the enrichment levels and amount of enriched uranium in their stockpile. They seek to buy time, hoping for a softer, more pliant administration in 2021, much like Barack Obama. The people of Iran deserve better than to be pawns in a mad game of run out the clock until the mullahs build a nuclear weapon. America will continue to work with our allies to apply maximum pressure on Iran. Iran can solve this problem very easily by demonstrating that they have made a strategic decision to stop pursuing nuclear weapons, give up their ballistic missile program, which is intended to provide delivery systems for those weapons, abandon their financial and military support for international terrorism, and stop their other malign activity in the Middle East. The ball is in their court. We recognize also that Iran presents a particular threat to Israel. President Trump has stated that the United States support Israel's right of self-defense, and he's taken consistent actions to demonstrate our support. Since 1993, presidents have stood up one after the other to say that they would recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and move the U.S. Embassy to the city of David. President Trump actually did it. He did it against dire warnings of unprecedented bloodshed, which did not materialize. Today, the United States Embassy is in Jerusalem. The President took another historic step recently in recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. In the United States, we closed the Palestine Liberation Organization office that was right here in Washington, D.C. We also stopped funding the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine and cut off funding that benefited the Palestinian Authority. When the PLO takes concrete steps to negotiate in good faith with Israel, we'll reconsider allowing its office to reopen down the street. When the Palestinian Authority stops paying for fighters and their families who end up in the hospital for killing innocent American and Israeli men, women, and children, we'll reconsider how and when we continue funding it. These are common sense steps in our national interest. Don't fund terrorists who are trying to kill you. A hard lesson for some people to learn. Perhaps you've noticed that the relationships in the Middle East have started to shift. Arab nations recognize that Iran will continue to fund terrorist organizations to destabilize the region and concentrate power in Tehran. Arabs and Israelis alike are now talking and working together in a united front against nonstop malicious Iranian actions. This is how strong, prudent leadership improves stability in the Middle East, and that is good for the United States. I was recently in Jerusalem for trilateral talks with Israel and Russia, and even Russia agrees with the United States that Israel's security is central to the stability of the Middle East. It's significant to get Russia and the United States to agree on almost anything today. So that was, I think, an important lesson. In particular, right now, we disagree on the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which prohibits ballistic and ground-based cruise missiles with a range of roughly 300 to 3,000 miles. This Friday will mark the official end of the INF Treaty when the United States withdraws. By and large, Americans are a law-abiding people. When we agree to a treaty, we uphold our end of the agreement. We expect other nations to uphold their end. For too long now, the United States abided by the treaty while Russia continued to develop advanced ballistic and hypersonic delivery systems to modernize its inventory, all in violation of the treaty. Here's another part of the problem. We've had our hands tied by this treaty while China develops its intermediate-range weapons unconstrained by any treaty obligations. In the interest of our national security, we chose to untie our hands in order to protect America effectively in the 21st century. There are some threats out there which are existential and with which there is no compromise. The President has charged his national security team to think more broadly about arms control, both in terms of the countries and the weapons systems involved. The world has moved on from the Cold War and its bilateral treaties that cover limited types of nuclear weapons or only certain ranges of adversary missiles. The President wants effective arms control that delivers real security for the American people and our allies. To achieve this, he has concluded that we must negotiate with both Russia and China. The administration has been consistent, beginning with the U.S. Nuclear Posture Review, that arms control can contribute to the national security of the United States and our allies. But unlike some true believers who worship at the altar of the current arms control apparatus, we see arms control as a means to an end and not an end in itself. For example, the New START nuclear agreement, which was ratified in 2010, was flawed from the beginning. It did not cover short-range tactical nuclear weapons or new Russian delivery systems. It is due to expire in February of 2021, and while no decision has been made, it's unlikely to be extended. Why extend a flawed system just to say you have a treaty? We need to focus on something better, and we will. Now, as I mentioned, with China, we're really concerned about a host of issues, not just nuclear weapons. We want to cooperate with China when our interests align, but as President Trump laid out in the National Security Strategy, we're here to compete. We see very hostile activity by China on a range of military fronts, such as in the East China Sea and the South China Sea. We see a tremendous buildup of their nuclear and ballistic missiles and blue water Navy capabilities. We see a determined form of their mercantilist economic policy internationally, and particularly the way they have abused their position in the World Trade Organization. The United States is committed to securing fair and reciprocal terms in our trade practices, and that will require China to be more transparent. And it's on that point that the President has particularly confronted China. He's doing it on the basis of an insight that no one in this room would dispute, that ultimately national, political, and military power and its projection around the world rest on a strong economy. When one country is abusing the rules of the international trading system for its own advantage, and particularly taking advantage of the United States, that must stop. You see through the use of tariffs that our administration is willing to use all available tools to help level this playing field. The trade negotiations that have followed the imposition of tariffs have concentrated on what we call structural issues: massive, persistent theft of American intellectual property, forced technology transfer, and discrimination against American businesses and investors. All of these complaints about China are shared in common by European, Japanese, and other foreign participants in the international economic system. China has made it common practice to coerce and intimidate other nations in the Indo-Pacific region, and the U.S. has made it clear that we want peace and stability there. We will protect freedom of navigation and overflight and other lawful uses of the sea. We'll continue to partner with those nations who respect national sovereignty, fair and reciprocal trade, and the rule of law. Now, turning to a different range of problems here, consider international organizations. Founding Fathers developed a constitution that to this day gives our nation legitimacy and the authority to create, interpret, and enforce laws. In our Constitution, we the people were handed the instruments of national sovereignty that make us an exceptional nation among nations. Others disagree with that. Some, even in our own country, have taken steps to reduce our sovereignty and national security, as shown by the establishment of the International Criminal Court. In 1998, a group of nations gathered and adopted a multilateral agreement called the Rome Statute. They established this International Criminal Court of 18 justices to try perpetrators of 4 crimes: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the crime of aggression. Now, there's no dispute that those crimes are heinous and unacceptable to the United States. And we have demonstrated time and time again, when Americans abuse our constitutional system, our rights, when they do it in foreign lands, we hold them accountable. We have the strictest rules of war of any country in the world. We have the strongest indoctrination and training of our service members. We have every right to be completely proud of the way America conducts war. I think that when it's considered that to the extent to which we've gone, the idea that we need an international criminal court to second guess us is just flatly wrong. Now, one central innovation in the International Criminal Court was the Office of the Prosecutor. This prosecutor has the authority to open investigations and pursue prosecutions. The prosecutor could go after military commanders, anyone who knew and didn't stop military operation, heads of state, members of parliament, all subject to fines and jail time. If there was ever a nightmare example of an illegitimate court structure with an unconstrained jurisdiction and an unaccountable prosecutor, this was it. It was my distinct pleasure to lead the effort for the United States to unsign the Rome Statute, which President George W. Bush did in 2002, 1 year before the court went live. Instead, we created over 100 bilateral agreements, all binding, so that other nations would not transfer U.S. personnel to the custody of the International Criminal Court. Unfortunately, not all our European friends would enter those bilateral agreements. But in late 2017, what we feared finally occurred when the ICC prosecutor requested authorization to investigate and prosecute American military members and intelligence personnel for alleged crimes committed during the war in Afghanistan. Last year, on the anniversary of the September 11 attacks, I had another distinct pleasure of letting the ICC know that America would not tolerate such an illegitimate intrusion upon our sovereignty. In April of this year, the ICC finally backed down and decided not to authorize the investigations, which was a win for the rule of law. An international court of outsiders that can second-guess the actions of U.S. personnel during war and is free to prosecute the chain of command up to and including the President of the United States has no authority or legal standing in our country. One of its more dangerous goals is to constrain the military actions of our nation, apart from our own constitutional system, which does so, to sow doubt in our service members and personnel that they may be subjected to war crimes not through our own constitutional system. Our national survival depends on our defense, which we are perfectly capable of regulating and judging ourselves. Now, as Edmund Burke well understood, we have to be continuously evaluating changed circumstances and be ready to adopt our policies accordingly. We must remain vigilant against all attempts from the outside and from the inside to erode our national sovereignty. We will not ask permission, and we will not apologize for protecting the United States of America. We will not kneel. Just to say that last line again, we will not kneel. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So I'm told that that you do questions and answers, which I'm happy to do, and I think there are microphones out there. Am I right? Yes. People are standing in line somewhere.
Good evening, Ambassador Bolton. My name's Ryan. I'm from Queen's University in the United Kingdom. On the 31st of October this year, the United Kingdom will leave the European Union. And I was just wondering what opportunities you see for greater cooperation between the United Kingdom and the United States, especially now we've got a new government under Boris Johnson.
Well, I think there are enormous opportunities for cooperation. I have to say, I was in London on the day of the Brexit referendum because I wanted to be there on what I thought would be an extraordinarily historic occasion. And I was just delighted that the British people had the wisdom to vote to leave the European Union. If I had been a Brit, I'd have voted to leave. It has been a long and arduous road to get to this point. But I think that freed of the regulations and restrictions of the European Union, the potential for economic growth in Great Britain is enormous. And I think there's a natural partnership with the United States. President Trump has been emphatic ever since the campaign that he looked forward to negotiating a reciprocal trade deal with the United Kingdom at the earliest opportunity. We're expecting that Prime Minister Boris Johnson will be here, we hope, in August, certainly very soon. And I think it's going to be a great relationship between the President and the Prime Minister, and I think it'll be a real opportunity to strengthen the special relationship between the two countries. This is an enormous step by Britain, and it's very much in America's interest to make sure it succeeds.
Thank you.
Over here.
Thank you for coming out tonight. Oh, sorry. Thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Sarah Garcia. I'm from Whittier. And a lot of Iranian Americans have inherited a long-standing mistrust of the U.S. Stemming from the 1953 coup. So I was wondering, how do we appeal to Iranian Americans to vote for President Trump when their family in Iran are affected by sanctions?
Well, I think what we've seen across Iran is demonstrations in opposition to the regime, not because of sanctions, but because of 40 years of mismanagement of the Iranian economy. The opposition is now very broad. It's not just in the educated classes in Tehran, it's out in the villages and farms with the small businesses and farm laborers and all across the country. It doesn't get reported in the Western press because the Western press doesn't leave the big cities. But I think the regime today is weaker than it's ever been. This is not a quarrel with the Iranian people. We've had great relations with Iran before the Islamic Revolution of 1979. There's every reason to believe we'd have great relations with them again. I should say that the coup in 1953 was actually the restoration of the legitimate government that had been ousted in a coup that started before the one that restored the Shah to power. It's a matter of historical interest, but I think it's important to keep that straight. And I think there are very strong feelings in the Iranian-American community about the illegitimacy of the government in Tehran now. And I don't think there's been a president since 1979 who has stood as strongly for the freedom of the Iranian people than Donald Trump.
Thank you.
So whoever's next out there. Yep. No others? Okay, fair enough. All right, thank you very much.
Oh. Ambassador John Bolton, ladies and gentlemen.